Hello and welcome again to our weekly share on the Parsha with the commentary of the Alshich. As I say at the beginning of every share, you've got an opportunity, if you like, to have the share dedicated for somebody you love who's passed away, or, as in the case this week, for Miriam Bas Rivka, who needs a refuah shalema. Let me just remind all of you that one of my Talmidas once said something I thought was very clever. I put this in one of my books, which is the problem is that doctors think they're gods and people forget that God's a doctor. So Miriam Bas Rivka should have a refuah shalema, and if you would like to dedicate the shiur for refuah shalema for somebody who's close to you, or indeed to commemorate and to have an aliyah for the neshama of somebody who's passed away, then please just let me know at yy@rabbiyyy.com, yy@rabbiyyy.com, and I will be more than happy to dedicate the shiur in the name of your loved one. The parsha is the parsha of Shoftim. So let's do the usual, share the screen, and let's remind ourselves what it says. We'll look at the Alshich. We're going to look at Rashi this week, and we're even going to add something that Rabbi Dessler says, which I hope will, together with the Alshich, make an enjoyable share for all of the people watching. Okay, so it's share the screen time, and here we go. So this is the parsha that we're going to be examining. Let's just read a couple of the words. If I make this bigger, it will be easier for you to see. And that way too. That should be good. And here we go. So Shoftim v'shotrim titin l'cha. So judges and officers, titin l'cha, you should appoint for yourself. B'kol sharecha, in all your gates, asher Hashem lekecha noisan loch l'cha, which the Almighty is giving to you, the shoftecha, to your tribes. V'shoftes ha'am mishpat tzedek, and they will judge the people with justice or righteousness, which is a horrible word. Lo esata mishpat, do not wrest judgment away from those who deserve it. Lo sake ponim, don't recognize people, favor people. Lo sech shochet, and certainly don't take a bribe. Yashochet yabre eni hachomim, because bribes blind the eyes of the wise. The yisalav dibur tzadikim, that pervert the words of the saintly. Interesting. Let me just move that over there. We're going to have to come back to that in a second, I think. And let's see if I can stop sharing and come back to you. Okay, so I think before we investigate this, obviously there is a crucial Jewish, this isn't picky, obvious right at the beginning. If it wasn't for fear of Malchus, it wasn't for fear of government and the consequences of government, then people would each man would eat his neighbor's whole. And one of my teachers said they wouldn't even stop to swallow. So anarchy, so much evident in the streets of the United States today, anarchy, rioting, that's anathema to Judaism. We need laws, we need judges. The judges has to be, of course, impartial and seem to be impartial, something which we don't have in the United States of America. And it has to be that there are law officers as well. Do not defund the police. Oh, that got very political, but it's certainly Orthodox Judaism. Anyway, so basically, these are the basic ideas which Rashi wants to explore as well. So let's start off with Rashi, because he says something interesting. We said there that we've got to shofta es ha'am, if you remember that, we've got to judge the people. We'll look at it again shortly, but I want to tell you what Rashi says about judging the people. And Rashi says, Imona dayonim mumchim v'tzadikim. Appoint judges who are mumchim, that's experts in law, v'tzadikim, and who are also saints, or also saintly, or also sincere, very good people. L'shofet tzedek, le-shofet tzedek, to be able to judge correctly. That's incredibly interesting to my mind that Rashi insists on both qualities. I could have, I suppose, just said it's very important to have judges who are very good at law, no law inside out. That just doesn't cut it as far as the Torah is concerned. They have to be saintly. They have to be very, very good people. But just to be an expert in law means absolutely nothing if the quality, if the ethics, if the morals of the judge, if his dedication or her dedication to making sure that the verdicts are impartial and clearly the result of the evidence, then everything breaks down, as we shall shortly see. So let's bear that comment of Rashi in mind and let's have a look at the Alshich and what he has to say. And so let me go back to sharing my screen. And if I do that again and do that, we can look at the psukim over here as we go along and see what the Alshich has to say on them. So again, the Alshich, we're only going to look at 4 of his questions on this particular parsha. And of course, as I always say to you, there are many, many more. I can't remember actually how many he asks just at the beginning on the first 2 psukim. There's probably something like 14 or 20, which is his normal way of, through his very clear and laser clear analysis of the psukim, he finds many things to ask questions about. How many? Oh no, only 10, where we're getting off very lightly. Okay, let's, he says, look at the psukim. So indeed, let's. It says, Roy Lawson Leib, says the Alshich. If you're thinking, you should pay attention to the fact, Al Omer Lecho, this is this be here, Shoftim, the Shoftim. That is the judges and policemen, Titin Lecho. He says, why say Lecho? You'll give to you. Just say, establish, Titain, put, or however we want to translate the word Titain. But why does it say, how does it, oh, so I've got my art scroll here. How do they translate it? You shall appoint. Okay, appoint. Titain really means to give, but never mind. You will give for yourself, perhaps, throughout all of your gates, as all of the cities, incidentally, just a historical point, courts at the time of the Torah are always situated next to the gates of the city so that law could be freely available to people. They would know where the law courts are. You don't have to look at ways. You would just know that wherever there is an entrance to the city, there'll be a court there and I can bring my case before the court. Okay, so the Alshich wants to know, question number 1, why it says lecho. So, obvious question. Why does it say lecho? 2, it says, you will judge the people. The shofta is ha'am, here it is there, and they will judge the people. Well, who else are they going to judge? Asks the Alshich. I'll read that to you because it's good. Omer v'shofta is ha'am. Milo yoda, who doesn't know, ki es ha'am yishofta, that people are who judges judge. And if it's talking about what it's talking about later, you should judge them rightly. Well, that would be obvious, and we wouldn't need those words. Let's do the third question. Milo yoda shaladon mishvat tzedek. And then it says, and you will judge them righteously or judge them correctly. Well, of course they will. Why does it have to say that? And the fourth question, and this is more interesting. This is Shoftim v'Shoftim titin l'cho. Judges and officers you will apply. Who's it talking to? The person doing the applying, the appointing, the appointers. Why not talk to the judges themselves? Asks the Alshich. And those are the questions we're going to look at. But he does, even though he doesn't ask it, refer to 2 other important points. Notice here, it says that Hashem noisen lecho. Hashem is giving you in through your gate. Again, let's do it. Shoftim, judges, policemen, appoint for yourself in all your gates. Asher Hashem alekecha noisen lecho, which Hashem is giving you. Right? No saying O and an E in a verb makes it into a present tense. If it was notan, then those vowels are changed into the past tense. Not he has given you, but he's giving you. Right? So that's interesting. Why is it in the present tense? Okay, I think we can also point out here there's 2 lechot. You already asked the question here. Why does it say lechot? Just say appoint. What's it mean? Appoint for you. And then again it says for you. Hashem is giving for you throughout your cities. So let's look at these really, I squeezed in 6 questions there, but they're all questions of the Alshich. However, he says there's 6 questions, establish 3 principles. So last week we had 5 principles, now we've got 3 principles, and I'll read this little bit of the Alshich to you. He says, the idea is like this, because these 3 first psukim that we glanced at before, then these 3 psukim, and I think I can probably stop sharing for a second, these 3 psukim establish the following thing. 1, Yidaber im Roshei Yisrael Hamamonim. The first thing, it's discussing or addressing the people who are appointing judges and policemen, talking to them. Two, then the psukim address the dayanim, the judges themselves. And the third one, im bali hadinim, is talking about the people who bring cases to court. So that's the litigants in court themselves. So the appointers of the judges and police. After that, then we've got the judges themselves, and then the people who are standing before them to be judged. Okay, now this is what he says, because I think this is very, very important. He says the following thing. He says, and I've seen this with my own eyes many times, and certainly one that sticks in my mind a lot. It might be the case that a person who is the big financier of the community, the power broker of the community, then he will appoint judges. And that, I suppose, would be expected. After all, power brokers do that sort of thing. It might subsequently be the case that, having done so, they might find themselves standing in front of the judge who they appointed and gave their career. What will happen if the judge finds them guilty of whatever the case is and expects them to pay money or some other penalty for whatever they've done wrong? That's why, if we go back to our screen, that's why, if I get this out of the way, it says, Shoftim v'shoftim titin lacho. Judges, you will appoint for you. Appoint for you. You can't say, oh, I appointed him, therefore you're going to find me guilty? Who put you there in the first place? The Torah is telling you that you, as the appointer, have to be willing to accept the judgment of the person that you appointed. Don't think it buys you any favors. Your job is to find the best dayanim. After that, sit back and accept that they might have to judge you sometime. I remember in Anglo Jury, when I was still there, Jonathan Sachs was effectively, I'm going to be careful what I say here, there's certainly one of the most wealthy men in Anglo Jury believed that he had sponsored and progressed Jonathan Sachs's candidature and candidacy to become the chief rabbi. And indeed, he expected things back. He expected Rabbi Sachs to bend the Jewish law in a certain direction that would have reflected his personal agenda and solved a couple of personal problems. He didn't do so. And this fellow wrote to the Jewish national newspaper of Anglo Jury, demanding his resignation, saying quite clearly, I bought him the chief rabbinate. Jonathan Sachs, in an address to many rabbis leading up to Rosh Hashanah, back in those days, referred to him as having blown a fuse, and indeed he had. But it's reflective and echoes that very often the big power brokers expect. If not explicitly, and maybe they don't even expect it consciously, but subconsciously, it's me, the guy who got you the job. No, it's got to be Shoftim v'shoftim titin lacho. You've got to be willing to accept their judgment as well. Good. So now we've solved the problem of why it says lacho, which it doesn't need to say lacho to convey the message you have to appoint judges, but it does need it to suggest that you have to appoint judges for you that you're willing to accept as well. Okay. Then let's go to the noising, which Hashem is giving you. Now this is remarkable. The Alshich points out there's almost, I think there's only one, I think we said this in our Parsha Shiur just 2 weeks ago, there's only one example I can remember, I can think of in the Torah, where the land of Israel is referred to as having been given. Rather, it's always being given. It's a nosein in the present tense. The land of Israel is given with certain conditions, 613 conditions actually, to the lease. And if you keep those conditions, you get to live there and stay there. And if you don't, then you can sever that bond between you and the land, as has happened historically. This is all, of course, no more controversial than the second paragraph of the Shema, but normally the land of Israel is an ongoing giving by Hashem, conditional on us keeping the rules. So therefore, it's interesting that it says you've got to appoint judges and policemen for yourself throughout all of your gates. Asher Hashem Let's look inside of the Alshich and see exactly what he says with that. I've got a little thing to show you here. So if I share the screen, I'm going to bring up this little bit of the Alshich. Ooh, that's too big. Sometimes too little. Ooh, why is it going down? That's better. Yeah, it'll be easier to read. And he says the following thing. Let's follow. And the Pasuk says that you have to have law courts and you've got to have policemen throughout the land, distributed throughout the city. So everywhere there's a gate, there'll be a law court. Shehu bekol ir, in every city. And when the Pasuk goes on to say, which I am giving you, if when you set up those courts, the land has already been given, you've already conquered that land of Israel and taken it into your possession, what he's really saying is, Adayin matonas sharecha, that the giving of your gates, your possession of the land of Israel, is still an ongoing giving. That's if you keep this commandment and set up law courts, then that present that you exist in which you've got possession of the land of Israel, will be the future as well. The imtadl, but if you don't, if you demur, or if you just reject the whole concept, if you don't appoint kosher judges, kosher policemen, if the judges become corrupt, etc., or if you expect them or buy them, then you have lost the biggest investment the Jewish people can make in keeping them in the land of Israel. Torah judges giving Torah decisions in a Torah way, unbiased, truthful, just. So he says, but if you don't, then the gift of the land of Israel, the gift of your gates where the judges sit, will be removed from you. Because the inheritance of the land of Israel is dependent on the appointment of kosher judges. Now this echoes to what Rashi said before. Rashi says we need two things: expert judges, but who are saintly. Here the Alshich says, and indeed Rashi uses the same phrase, he's quoting the Medrash, kosher judges. It's possible to have non-kosher judges. And throughout Jewish history, there are plenty of examples of scholars of incredible talent and giftedness, like Doeg, the Alf-Beistin, the head of the Sanhedrin of Shaul HaMelech, who was the greatest Torah scholar in Jewish history at that time since Moses. But was he a good person, a great person? No, he was not. So therefore, you've got to have judges who are both, who combine both together. Okay. Now, if you get that, then fine. Then the land belongs to you and you will keep the land of Israel. Now there's something else which you have to look at. And again, we'll go back to the Alshich, so I'll stop sharing the screen. Yes, and you've got me back again. So it says, let me read a little bit more of the Alshich too. V'derech, and the general rule is, if you appoint judges, then shehu bekol shevet b'shevet, it has to be throughout all of the 12 tribes, or 13 tribes of the Jewish people. Because remember, yes, it's split into 2 tribes. So it's 13 tribes altogether. And it's now it's talking about, or talking to the judges. The first one, up to now, we've been talking to the person who appoints the judges, and the people who appoint the judges. Now we're talking to the judges themselves. And it's got to be tzedek tirdov. You've got to pursue justice. But more than that, you've got to judge all the people. That is to say, of course, each tribe will appoint their own judges. But here, the rigorousness in making sure that the judges judge with complete neutrality, without bias, extends to people who are not members of your own tribe. So each tribe will appoint their own judges, but they've got to judge all the people. And the example he brings is the example of Shimshon. Shimshon, the famous Shofet, then he judged the whole of the Jewish people. Devorah, the Shofetess, now when Deborah judged, she judged all the people. It leads to too much corruption, could lead to too much corruption if you judge only the people in your own tribe. What happens if somebody in your tribe is bringing somebody from a different tribe? Then you might be biased towards him. The whole of Judaism is predicated on judges. I'll show you examples in a second. Always judging impartially. And Jewish law is extremely rigorous to make sure that halacha is extremely rigorous to make sure that impartiality is guaranteed. I'll come back to that shortly. So it says that you've got to imtitin Shoftim the Shoftecha, they'll judge the people. Even you've got judges for your tribes that sit in your cities, at your gates, they will judge all of the people. and judge them fairly. And then there's the other thing we said, that's the other principle which we wanted to discuss, and that was the principle of the people who themselves are accepting the judgment. Accepting the judgment is crucial. Now, in actual fact, it's sad to say that very often Dayanim are hardly popular people. Two true stories, both from Manchester. Sadly, not too long ago, somebody called Diane Westheim, who was one of the Dayanim in the Manchester based team, a very old friend of mine. When I started an organization called All Rivka, he very kindly said a shiur for me to 180 or so women who used to come weekly to the shiuring. And when he started yeshiva, he asked me to say a shiur for him. And we knew each other for a very, very long time. I was once visiting him, and we were sitting discussing some issue, and suddenly his wife came to the door and said, "I'm terribly sorry." And she mentioned somebody by name is here, and I can't not let you speak to him. And there was a fellow outside, so the guy looked at me and he sort of like sighed, and his face sort of fell, and he said, "I've got to go." So anyway, so he went out and he closed the door, and I honestly tried not to listen, but it was impossible because the noise and the volume coming from the next room was really quite amazing. I took a Jewish book from one of his shelves. I was trying to concentrate on that, but the story was, I don't know if they use this phrase in America. In England, they've got a phrase called gazumping. Gazumping is when you make a bid for a house and it's agreed. Not agreed in formal legal terms, but it's sort of like a handshake. And then somebody comes along with a bigger offer, and the person accepts the bigger offer. Surprise, surprise. This fellow had been gazumped, and he had come to complain to Diane Westheim about this. But he was screaming because Diane Westheim said, "It's not nice. I agree it's not ethical, but halachically, there's nothing I can do about it. The person is allowed to take a higher bid." And at that point, he lost his temper and started screaming and shouting about the Diane not being up to the job and useless. And I remember when you were a kid, and there was a whole bunch of insults. Indeed, another Diane in the Manchester based team from a different generation was something called Diane Golditch. Diane Golditch once said he had two daughters who never get married, both extremely sweet ladies. I assume they still live together as sisters in Manchester today. But Diane Golditch said the reason that they never got married because so many curses that he got from people who felt that his judgment or the base team's judgment was not appropriate or wrong. It has to be that you're willing to accept the judgment of the base team as well. And what happens when the Jewish people don't? Well, again, the Alshich in the Seder of Rus, in the Megillah Rus, echoes something you just said in the Seder, the parsha that we're looking at here. We said that the appointment of kosher judges in and of itself is enough to keep the Jewish people living in the land of Israel. But in the story of Rus, it starts off by saying, "Vayhi b'yemei shafot ha-shoftim, vayhi ra'ov ba'oretz." And it was with days when the judges judged, and there was a famine in the land. So the Alshich, with his laser-like observation of the verse, says, in the days when the judges judged, what else did they do? So why does it say, why did the prophet Shmuel write down days when the judges judged? And also the words "vayhi" means something bad's going to happen. So what was the bad thing? Oh, it was a famine in the land. No, it's got its own "vayhi." Vayhi b'mei shafot ha-shoftim. Vayhi ra'ov ba'aretz. It was a famine in the land. So what's the first "vayhi" about? To which the Alshich says it was days when they judged their judges. They judged their judges. In judging their judges, that brought disaster. And they lost possession of the land of Israel. Hashem sends along a famine. Actually, as you know, they didn't budge. And in their love and affection for the land, even though they were enduring a famine, only one family left. But Hashem sent a famine to let them know that he was threatening to have them thrown out of the land because they no longer valued or accepted their judges. In fact, the rabbis say, whatever the judge, having heard a case, felt was the appropriate punishment that somebody should suffer, who was guilty, the people who want to do or carry out that judgment or that punishment on the judge himself, they judge their judges, which perhaps explains why, of course, Elimelech and Nomi and their family left. He was, after all, the head judge, so he would have got maximum flack. It's got to be the people accept the judgment as well, or again, you come to anarchy. So let me share the screen again with you, and we'll see what the Alshich says inside. So let's do that. It's that bit there. So clicking. Yes, here we go. And he says, let me explain what's going on. Now we come to the second lecho. Remember we had two lechos. Let's remind ourselves of that. If I get rid of this one. And there it goes. Shoftim titan lecho. And we explained why it was. That was referring to the people who appoint the judges. You've got to accept their judgment. And you, which is giving you noisen lecho. And here's the second lecho. Just say noisen. What Hashem is giving you. It doesn't mean giving to you. Just say giving. So let's go back to our Alshich, which is this. The novel lady, let me explore this idea, he says. The Shimle, by considering al omro lecho pam shenis, when it says a second lecho, kama lecho l'shavtecha, to you, to your tribe. God is addressing the people who appoint the judges within the Jewish people. The first one says, make sure, as we said, that you accept the judgment. Last one for yourself. You should judge them. That if they say, but you gave them the job in the first place, that you deserve a financial punishment, you'll accept it. I will look upon it as though all of the land and all of the cities and all of the gates of the land of Israel, they're yours. But in the excuse in the merit of appointing kosher judges and accepting what kosher judges have to say, it's as though it's your land, your gates. When you play ball, when you accept you're part of the system, there is a system, and it might well be the judge doesn't give you the decision that you like. Still, it is the case you have to accept it. There, interestingly, the pasuk goes on and talks about you go to the Elohim in those days. If you don't know what a law is, or you need judgment, you go to the Elohim. The Elohim usually means God. Actually, the word means power. But judges are called Elohim because they have power. But ultimately, we believe that if you've got kosher judges, as we said from Rashi, who are tzaddikim, and they're judging with complete impartiality, then the judgment, even though you don't like it, you accept because it comes from the Elohim. Ultimately, you're saying that it comes from God. They are the conduit. They're the nearest thing we've got today to prophecy. And who knows, it might seem unfair to you, but the judgment came from Hashem. And life's full of unfairnesses, or so it strikes us, but it comes from Hashem, because ultimately it might well be for our good. So the last thing is the Jewish people have to accept the judgment as well in order to be able to make sure we secure our tenure, our attachment to the land of Israel. Interesting. All contained within careful analysis of the words. But let's stay with this. This is such an important concept. Let's revisit, or rather visit, what Rabbi Dessler has to say on the subject in Mitzvah Eliyahu. You see, as I mentioned to you before, the halacha is so insistent in impartiality and absolute equality before the law that, how about this? When two people are standing in front of the dayan, then not one is not allowed to speak before the other speaks. Try that again, because it sounds a bit strange. When two people standing in front of the dayan, so imagine there are two people here, and I'm the dayan, then one cannot speak until the other one has spoken. But that means he can't speak until he's spoken. And what it means is that neither is allowed to speak first. Whereas, of course, under English common law, which is the basis of American law, then normally you have one person putting his side, and then, in the case of the prosecution, then the case for the defense. That doesn't happen in Judaism. As soon as the two people there, he says, well, we were walking down the road one day, and he said, no, I didn't. Yes, he did. So the case or the version is challenged straight away. Why? Because we are concerned that hearing one version, the first version you hear will, as it were, dig itself in, and it'll be hard for the second version to uproot it. So that means that both are able to challenge the account of the other straight away, so the dayan is not hearing one version first. We're concerned that psychologically it could embed in a way which will bias the judge's finding. Not only that, you're not, if one is standing, the other one has to be standing too. If one's sitting, the other one has to sit. They have to look the same. If one is extremely well dressed, extremely rich, and presents well, and the other one's, well, I don't know, a punk rocker, if they still have those, skinhead, tattoos, pierced, or a big hole in the ear, then they would both have to, we'd have to take out that earring, or the other one have to have an earring in. We don't want the person's appearance to prejudice the judge either. And there's a whole load of very, very strict laws to make sure, no less than the fact that the two witnesses have to be able to corroborate each other's testimony in every detail. If there's a discrepancy between the two witnesses, then of course the case doesn't proceed any further. But here's Rabbi Dester. Let me read this to you. The Pasuk goes on to say that they've got to judge favorably, and as we said before, justly, and not to view somebody who is rich with a prejudiced eye. And listen to this story. This is Rabbi Dester on page 54. The Shiur, of course, I forgot to point out, the verse goes on to say you're not allowed to take a bribe. Well, obviously. Rashi says even a bribe, money you give to the judge to judge honorably. You're giving money. I'm giving you this money because I want you to judge right. Right? Don't show me any prejudice, any prejudice or any bias. Just judge completely correctly. Here's some money to make sure you do that. That's called bias, and that's called a bribe. But listen to this. What is the degree? How much would you have to give that would, as the Pasuk says, distort the ability of the judge to see properly, even if he wanted to see properly? Afila mashu, even the smallest amount, so a penny. Even were you to give the judge a penny, we would assume, or we would be concerned that that could somehow or other cause him to judge you favorably. The rabbis, he says, give an example. It's a Gemara in Ksubas on page Kufhei Omid Beis, 105b. Al Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi. There was something called Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi had an oris. Now, an oris is a tenant farmer. The idea is that I have some land, and I don't at the time, because I'm too busy doing Zoom videos, I don't have the time to actually work the land, so it's earning me no money. So I'll find somebody who's got nothing, no income whatsoever. I say, how would you like to become my oris? And oris is the tenant farmer. You will work the land, you've got no land, but you'll work my land. And you will generate whatever the crop is that we're making, whether it's wine or barley or wheat or whatever, or maybe several crops. And you will get half, a third, I'm not sure how the proportions will go, whatever you agree. And I'll get the other half. And we both gain. You get nothing, now you've got an income. I've got plenty, but I can't I can't monetize it, now I can. And I get a lot to do, a lot of income as well. Agreed? Agreed. That's a tenant farmer. The Hebrew word is oris. Okay, so what happened was that this oris, part of the agreement was that the fruit that was generated from either the vineyard or the orchard that he was growing there, he would bring some of the fruit, which was the part of the fraction of the crop which belonged to Rabbi Yossi, he would drop it in his house on a Friday morning. So he would have fruit for Shabbos. And it's nice to have also some nice things on the table on Shabbos. One day, as he was going to a court case, he was bringing somebody to a Beis Din or being brought to a Beis Din. And as he was walking past Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi's house a day early, because court cases on Mondays and Thursdays, the market days, when people would be in the city anyway, and therefore easy access to court. Then, as he was going to be there a day early, he decided to drop the fruit that belonged to the rabbi to save him the trouble of coming back the next day. So he knocked on the door, and he explained that he was on his way to the court. I just want to bring you, as per our arrangement, this basket of fruit. Listen to this. This is interesting. Okay. Let's find a place. Okay. Rabbi Shmuel Yahadayan, Rabbi Shmuel, who was one of the judges who'd be hearing the case, he was concerned that this, if he accepted the fruit, this extra security he had by having the fruit a day early, could prejudice him in favor of his oris, this fellow. Lo kibel hiperetz, and he refused to accept it. Va'asher lo kiblom, choshesh oid, and even though he refused to accept it, because it might prejudice him, he was still worried that the fact that Philip wanted to give it to him would prejudice him, and therefore he refused to accept it altogether. Moshe Hagdim loy, and disqualified himself from hearing the case. I can't judge your case anymore. When he handed it over to other judges. Now the Gemara contends with incredible continuation of the story. Later on that day, Rabbi Shmuel was walking through the town center, and he heard the court case being tried. And as I said to you before, they're usually very noisy places, because after all, if both people are speaking at the same time, then they're contradicting each other, and of course, voices get raised. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. Okay, that sort of stuff. Rabbi Shmuel stood outside listening to the court case and the trial proceeding. Consistently, he found himself finding in favor of the tenant farmer. Then later, after closer introspection, he came to the conclusion that indeed, the benefit that the fellow tried to give him, even unintentionally, by bringing his own fruit, a day early, then that was biasing him in favor of this fellow. Rabbi Shmuel said, look at me. The fruit was my fruit. If I'd taken it, it was mine. Yet I found myself consistently finding in favor of my tenant farmer. How much more so if somebody actually takes a bribe? Are they unable to see the truth? Judaism demands the highest standards of a judge. It's not just that he has to be expert in law, he has to be a tzaddik, somebody b'shomer Yossi, who would not let the slightest suspicion that he suspected about himself, possibly play a part in influencing a court case, and disqualified himself from doing so. The appointers have to respect the process, even if they become part of the process themselves and are found guilty by the dayan, the judge that they appointed. The people have to accept that we need judges and we need police to enforce their judgments, because it's only when the Jewish people accept Torah law in the land of the Torah, the land of Israel, that we secure our place ongoing in the land of Israel. I wish you all a very good chance.